Hello, scholars. This is Mr. Rogers, your online instructor, and today we're going to show you how to annotate a story for the story elements. And the story elements that we want to annotate for are the setting, the problem or conflict that the main character or characters face, the characters themselves and what kind of traits they have, and we also want to annotate how characters change. These all help us with close reading and to help us understand what takes place in the story. Now, before we annotate, we always read the story quickly for just what's going on in the story. And the story that we're doing today is Shells, about a 14-year-old boy who's an orphan who goes to live with their aunt, and they don't get along, they fight, they dislike, even hate each other. And then they go out and buy a hermit crab, and things begin to change, and through the hermit crab they work out their differences and live happily ever after. So in the beginning of the story, we find the problem of the story, which I'm going to underline now. Now, I don't have to highlight every single line to show that there is a real problem between Esther and Michael. They're fighting to start the story, and they're talking about hating or not hating each other. So I'm going to start and put a P for problem. Next, I learn about the setting of the story. Esther lives in a condominium in a wealthy section of Detroit, but I also learn about Esther. Most of the area's residents were older, like her, and afraid of the world they lived in like her. They stayed indoors much of the time. They trusted few people. So I'm going to annotate this for two elements. S, because we find out the setting, but also we learn about Aunt Esther. Okay, she is an older woman who is afraid of living and life. So I'm going to put a big C for character and a small t because I have some evidence of her character trait. In fact, I continue down with the story, and she never married or had children, so that certainly is also character trait information, and only lived in Detroit. So again, I could put character trait here. So the next part of the story teaches us about Michael, who, remember, lost his parents. That's why he was living with Esther. And the narrator tells us he was lonely. The narrator also tells us that his heart hurt him, he was in pain. And finally, the narrator tells us that he does hate Esther because she was different than his mom and dad. So again, I'm going to put a C with a smaller t because I found character traits. So as we know as readers, an important thing that happens in many stories is characters change, and often their changes lead to help solving the problem. And that's what happens in this story. Michael and Esther go and buy a hermit crab named Herman, and suddenly we start to see the characters changing. So Fraidy Cat and Esther goes home and picks up the crab, and this shocks Michael, and it starts a conversation. And then Esther says that even though she's not into crabs, it's okay with her if you keep him to Michael. And this shows that her character is changing. So I'm going to put a big C for character and a small c for character changing. So after that bonding moment, Michael and Esther go back to the pet store because Esther says that Sluggo, the hermit crab was not Herman, my bad, needs a friend. And so they go and buy a whole bunch of hermit crabs. Who would have thought that? And this event leads to this. Esther looks at Michael and whispers to him, "I'm sorry." And he turns away as she says to Michael, "You must hate me." And Michael then looks at her and says, "I don't hate you." So the characters who started off in the story fighting and hating each other now have come together. And so we have the solving of the problem, which we note over there. And I put a P with a small s for problem solved. And there you have it, how to annotate a story.